Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the December 20th meeting of the Cañon City Historic Preservation Commission. Jim, will you take a roll call, please?
Sure. Lauren Flick,
Here.
Chris Jenkins.
Present.
Lester Lamone,
Here.
Mike Madone,
Here.
Rich Millard,
Here.
Jim Nelson here, Mildred Wentz.
Here.
Looks like everyone has arrived. Welcome Amy Schmeiser of the Cañon City City Council for joining us up here today. We will take a look. Has everyone had a chance to review the meetings of the minutes of the last meeting on November 15th? Are there any corrections or additions?
I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
Do we have a
Second.
Go ahead and call roll.
Lauren,
I'll abstain. I was not present.
Chris,
Yes.
Lester,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Rich,
Yes.
Jim, yes, Billy.
Yes.
And the motion passes. The first item on today's agenda is the CLG 2024 sub-grant application. Lisa, would you
Yep.
update us on that?
Yep, I wanted to, make sure that you got updated on the application process that we've done so far. As of the last meeting, I had sent out a request to get some estimates for the resurvey and survey of properties downtown within the historic district and adjacent properties to the district. Our first estimate that we received was over the maximum request for the grant. The maximum request for the sub-grant is $25,000. The estimate that we received, the first estimate was over $29,000. So it was suggested to me that instead of doing a full resurvey of the downtown, that we would do strategic properties within the downtown historic districts as a resurvey. The other aspect that we could do, recommended, was doing a windshield survey of the other properties within the downtown historic district that would be done by volunteers and or city staff. That would be less expensive in the project as a whole. And the estimate for that came back at $9,200, considerably less. Because there was going to be a total of 80 properties to be resurveyed within the downtown district. And then just highlighting resurvey of specific properties, that would narrow it down to 69 properties that would need to just do a windshield survey. I was hoping to get a draft. I did send a draft in with this project total amount. The draft was due on December 11th. I received responses back and suggestions just yesterday. So I'm still working through dealing with the suggestions and how we would want to proceed doing a windshield survey specifically. I'll be addressing that as soon as I can. The turnaround time is pretty quick. I know we need, as part of the grant application, a signature from not only the chair of the commission, but also the mayor's signature as well. The first opportunity to do that before the grant is due is January 2nd, and the memo to get that in is tomorrow. So I will try my best to get a final draft ready to go for tomorrow. But I will definitely send out a draft to the rest of the commission by next week, or if anybody wants to review it.
So did we solicit any additional bids, or was that the only one that we solicited?
For this grant application, it was just an estimate. Since we have to do a formal bid process, anything over $6,500, if we were to be awarded this grant, it's just an estimate that's required or recommended, highly recommended for the grant application.
So will you
So
clarify?
the timeline, for the timeline, it was just necessary for just getting this estimate.
What was the December 11th deadline that we missed?
That was to get, submit a draft to the CLG to get responses back, to clarify and get suggestions back, so to improve the grant.
Did we get something to them by that date?
Oh, yes.
So we didn't miss that deadline?
No, we
then?
didn't miss
Okay.
that date. It was just getting the suggestions got back just yesterday. So I'm working through that to finalize the grant application.
Did
for
they seem
the due
open to
date.
the windshield survey?
Yes, yes, they did.
Any questions, comments? So you will have something for me to sign tomorrow?
Hopefully. If not, I will probably email it to you, and we can probably get that electronic signature if you're able to do that.
Sounds good. And I don't know that we need to take any action on that, do we?
If you want to make a motion to have you sign the application once the final draft is completed.
Do we
That's
have a
something you
motion?
can do.
So moved.
So moved. Second?
Take roll if you would, please, Jim.
Lauren,
Approve?
Chris,
Yes?
Lester,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Rich,
Yes.
Jim, yes. Mildred?
Yes,
And the motion is approved, and I will be available in the afternoon tomorrow. If you need me to swing by, I will do that. The next item is an interesting topic, the discussion concerning the New Method Laundry Building on Main Street. And I think, Rick, are you here to discuss that?
Yeah, I am. The letter that I provided you has a little bit of the background behind our acquisition of New Method and how we learned about the condition of the New Method building. To give you a little more background about why we are going through this process is we are proposing using EPA funding to take the building down in order to assess the source contamination under the building. When the EPA is using their funding for projects, there are certain requirements, and one of them is to create a cleanup plan, and part of that cleanup plan is to make sure that other federal agencies and state agencies who control federal dollars have an opportunity to chime in on whether it affects their funding, their interests, I guess you could say. So the EPA sent a request off to the State Historic Preservation Office claiming that since New Method is a non-contributing building to the historic district, that the process of taking the building down will not impact the historic district. The SHPO office didn't agree with that because they said that it will have an impact on our historic district as a whole, and they didn't have concerns about necessarily the process we went through. They didn't know that we went through a process to determine what to do about the contributing building that's adjacent to it, that's attached to it. So from what they saw, they didn't know we took that into consideration, And they thought, well, if you take the building down, we want to make sure that there's consideration for the building that shares a wall, a contributing building that shares a wall. When the EPA received their notice from SHPO, from the SHPO office, Greg Davis, who was our EPA manager, project manager, contacted me and Lisa and let us know that he failed, basically, in receiving the no impact agreement, I guess you could say, that we would now have to, or EPA would now have to go through a process with the state to make sure that we can take the building down. Otherwise, the State Historic Preservation Office has the ability to completely shut down the federal funding of this project. So he and I, Greg and I, got on the phone and tried to contact Joe Saldivar, who is the architect with State Preservation Office, to talk to him. He wasn't available. And since this is an EPA process, Greg and I decided on the next step initially was to make sure that the State Preservation Office understood everything that went into determining how we were going to handle the building, instead of going through the other processes for now. In other words, there's more information that State Preservation Office needs to know that wasn't included with the EPA's request. And that's the letter that you have in your packets today. Once this, and my intention is to submit this letter tomorrow, and if they agree that there will be no significant impact, we're good to go. If they don't agree there's no significant impact, then we'll go through the EPA process, EPA and historic preservation process to appeal their, I guess you could call it, decision. So with you on in your packets is some photos. Along with the letter that you have there, I will be sending, the letter has the Three Rocks Engineering Survey attached to it. We will also be sending photos of the building to let them know what the condition of the building, because they haven't seen it. Historic Preservation Office hasn't seen it. And then also the RFP for demolition, showing them that we are indeed taking into consideration, that's a primary consideration, is the shared wall between New Method Laundry and the contributing building on the east side. That building is, you probably remember it as Chuck Season Grill building. That shares a wall with New Method, as does Fit 101 on the east side, or west side, but that is not a non-contributing building to the historic district. So they weren't as concerned about that one. Our analysis takes into consideration both sides of the building, both businesses adjacent to the building, and requires that in our demolition engineering, in the engineering that has to be done to take the building down, the engineers meet with and take into consideration the owner's needs of those two buildings. So a little bit more history on how we came upon this building. New Method closed in 2020 during COVID. Their boiler, which is a multi-decades-old boiler, died, and he couldn't repair it, couldn't find parts for it. He was most likely ready for retirement. I don't know the details, but ailing in health, and he decided to put the building up for sale. We were contacted, the city was contacted by both of the property owners that are attached to that, both of the neighboring property owners on the east side and the west side. They didn't get together to contact the city because they don't even know each other. They both contacted the city and said, we have serious concerns about this building. If it sits there vacant, it's going to eventually collapse and cause problems with our building. And on east side, he already had interactions with the previous owner because there is a doorway between the two, and if there was going to be, there wasn't anything in terms of like flooding or anything like that, but he knew that because there was the doorway there and there was already weakness in his wall on his side of the building, that he had some major concerns, and if it did not get purchased by somebody who was going to renovate it and it was going to sit there vacant, it was going to fall apart and take his building wall with it. So that's back when we had Tom here, who was a Main Street program manager. So Tom and I and Ryan Stevens went to look at the building, really to determine what we could use it for. You know, what's the highest and best use for this building? Because we didn't know what it looked like inside either. And we went into it and realized very quickly that the building is very structurally unsound. You can see the sky in a number of locations. They were operating machinery under open sky in there. And it was very intimidating to walk in. So we began to go down the process of, well, how do we deal with this now? Is it marketable? Is it saleable? Is it rehabable? Can you do anything with it? And the reality is, when you're walking downstairs and you go upstairs, it's very clear that if you were to rehab that building, you would have to take down the entire second floor, because the whole floor is wavy and weak, and it would have cost a major amount of money to rehab that building, probably more than anybody would have been willing to pay for the building and renovation. We don't have the success in this community of bringing in a lot of very large investors who could take on a project like that. So it really didn't seem viable for a marketable building. And the only thing really we could do would take it down. We also at the time received a multi-purpose grant from the EPA, which allows us to do assessments and cleanups of properties. And I approached to the EPA and our EPA consultant with this dilemma, you know, like, do we do a phase 1 on it? And quite honestly, our EPA consultant, our brownfield consultant, said, you don't even want to touch this if it's a dry cleaner, because it's going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to be a big cleanup, and it's really hard to determine how much a cleanup like this is going to cost. Considering the public safety side of it, considering all the needs of the community, our needs for downtown, the public safety concerns of this building, we really didn't have a choice. We had to go down the road of assessing the building for contamination, because we knew it was there. So the EPA suggested, instead of us using a multi-purpose grant for that, the EPA suggested we apply for a targeted brownfield assessment grant, and then the EPA managed the assessment of the building. So they took it out of the realm of the multi-purpose grant and took it into their own hands, understanding that we didn't know at the time, but we probably had contamination in the community from dry cleaning chemicals. We did a number of tests, a number of phase 1 environmental site assessments, 3 different phase 2 environmental site assessments, which involved drilling monitoring wells throughout the community. And after all of those, and after retesting the phase 2 monitoring wells, it was determined through a relationship, through an agreement with us and EPA and Colorado Department of Health and Environment, that the contamination caused is minimal in the community, which is good. The vast majority of the wells have levels that are under EPA and CDPHE concerns, under their requirements. So they are not at all concerned about that part of the contamination. We submitted a corrective action plan with CDPHE, and they approved it. That really calls for what's called monitored attenuation of the contamination that's in the community. So basically what that means is it's dissipating on its own, it's dissipating at a high rate, and it won't be a concern down the road. The challenge is we still have to find the source. The source of the contamination is under the building. We know there's no contamination on the north side of the building because the monitoring wells showed nothing there. CDPHE and the EPA would like us to inspect, basically assess the ground underneath the building. The challenge is we can't get machinery in there. And if we do, and we create vibration, it's very likely that damage will cause, or vibration will cause the building, concerns with the building, we'll put it that way. Nobody felt safe enough to be able to get drills in there and vibrate the building and find out where the contamination is. So EPA and CDPHE, it was actually EPA's suggestion, is that we consider the building investigative derived waste take the building down, remove the concrete, assess the material underneath, the soil underneath, and determine where the source is, how bad the source is, remediate that, and then initially, and to this day, it still is, the only thing we can do with that is cap it, which is to basically create a parking lot. It is possible in the future that if we find out there's very little source contamination, we get it cleaned up, we can do something else there. But initially, we don't know that, and we won't know that until we can take the building down and assess what's underneath it. So the plan right now would be to cap it. The pictures you have there are pictures of the building as it stands right now. The condition of the building when we looked at it was just about as you see it now, with the exception of the fact that now there are busted up lights in there because somebody got in there and vandalized it. There's clothing racks that were tipped over, knocked over. The owner of the building on the east side has dealt with water issues in there because it's literally raining and dripping snow into the building. So he's put some cattle trough type drums in there to collect water, and then he goes in and he pumps it out. He's been doing that for quite a while, and I'll show you where that initially came from and some of the structural issues that exist in that building. So I thought about asking for this meeting to happen in there, but I really don't like taking people in this building because, quite honestly, it intimidates people a lot, and I wouldn't take anybody upstairs because it's too easy to fall through. So what we're looking at here is New Method Dry Cleaner now, as it was. I took many of these pictures within the last couple of weeks. So this photo here, you can see in the center of the photo, there's a 2-inch pipe that's cut off. Shortly after this building was put up for sale, a 2-inch water line burst in the building. Granted, there was damage on the wall already, but that 2-inch water line created the damage that we see on the wall here. It's important to note that the brick you see there is adobe brick. It's not treated for exterior use. It's 1883, 1874 time period brick. And right now, if you hold your hand up there and you take some of this brick, it just crumbles into sand. The owners on the adjacent property owner on the east side, the interior of his wall is also deteriorating, but there is a double wall there. So his side needs some work as well that we will eventually recommend that he or we go to the State Preservation Office to get some funding to help fix that one. But this then created a lot of basically water damage to his building, flooded the New Method building, went into his building, went into his basement, went into his first floor, damaged his floor, damaged his basement. And Ryan and I also went in there to see that after the fact. It was dried up. But this is really an indication of how significant the damage is to the building. This photo is a close-up of that. Again, you can walk up and literally just take the sand, pull sand right out of those bricks. This is in the same wall. This is the shared wall on the contributing side, just as the other one was. This is toward the front of the building. You can see behind a cabinet right there, there's a doorway. That's a doorway that goes into the neighbor's building. So it is very, very easily accessed by water, vandals, you name it, they could get in there. But it shows more of the damage. The good part of this, I guess you could call it the good part, is that they did treat the wall because of the moisture in the building. We think that they stuccoed the wall because there's a lot of moisture in laundry, and that brick can't take moisture. It just absorbs it and expands and contracts, and then it dries out, and then it turns to sand. But they did stucco the wall on the first floor of the building. This one is another view. You can see some more of the piping in the front. This is the front of the building again. This one shows considerable damage on the second floor coming down to the first. There is pigeon droppings, pretty thick pile of pigeon droppings underneath that opening up there, and that was there when we looked at the building originally. And then you can see where those pipes are coming from the left, there's a beam up there. And you can't quite tell right now, but that beam was cut off at one point, historically, somewhere along the years, and then reinforced with a new beam, post and beam construction that went to the front of the building. But toward the back, you can see the beam is kind of sagging back there, and that structurally is just not a sound part of the building. They've got some ties in there that were meant to shore it up as well. Who knows when that was done, how long ago that was done, but it certainly is causing problems with the building. And this is more toward the front of the building, another shot of the ceiling of the first floor, floor of the second floor. All right, this is a shot. This is one of the first things you noticed when you walked in the building. This is really messier than it was when we looked at it. It's 3 years have gone by, and vandals and water, and the previous owner was in there cleaning things up, trying to clean things up every now and then. But the sunlight you see back in the corner is above a machine, and that is pure damage to the roof. It's not, I wouldn't even want to walk on the roof, honestly. If there were to be some way to get up and fix the roof, I don't think it'd be good to do. So this is what we're looking at, basically. The dry machining, you can't really tell, but the dry cleaning machine is on the left, just kind of lost in the haze there. And there's that same area back there. You notice a tarp hanging on the right. There's water coming down. I was just in there the other day, and there's water coming down from snow melt on the roof. And that's the machine that's underneath, basically underneath the sky right there. The wall here is the west wall, so that's the one sharing the Fit 101 side. One of the interests that the owner of that building has is that Fit 101 uses the backyard for exercise. And if we take that down and put a parking lot there without putting some kind of a barrier, all those ladies will be exposed to people in the parking lot, which they really are not fond of. That's one of the reasons that anybody that's going to come in and do design, engineering, and demolition of the building need to take into consideration the business practices of the neighboring businesses to ensure that they still have that security back there. And what you can't, this is a terrible picture really. There's a dryer on the left. It's pointing toward the boiler room back there. And it's supposed to be showing some of the troughs that are collecting rainwater, but it's not a good picture, unfortunately. So this is what the State Historic Preservation Office did not see when they evaluated whether there was going to be an impact on our historic district. They really took it from the sense, and understandably so, they took it from the sense of taking down an old building downtown, thinking we wanted to create a parking lot. And that's really not the objective. The objective of the project is to ensure public safety by taking down a hazard and cleaning up a hazard that's underneath it. So the letter here identifies that, shares that, and like I said, as we move forward, if they decide they don't agree with us, then we'll go through the formal EPA appeal process. Went about it this way because I wanted to honor the EPA's requests and how we do this instead of just going to the State Preservation Office saying, no, you made a mistake. So this is in accord with the EPA's requests, was reviewed by our attorneys, and really this is our next step starting tomorrow. We do have an environmental attorney involved with this project who is working on our corrective action plan. He actually worked on it with us, and it was approved. So I ran this by him to make sure that everything is good, and that environmental attorney also evaluated our demolition RFP. Demolition will be paid for by the EPA as, like I said, investigative derived waste. And then CDPHE is also in line for if we need any more assessment funding. And then when we get to the cleanup, we have multi-purpose grant hopefully for that. And if we run out of multi-purpose grant, the EPA and CDPHE are ready to step in with more funding to help with the cleanup. dry cleaning contamination is a big deal to EPA and CDPHE. There's not a lot of these out there. And they try to do what they can to contain the cost of cleanup as much as they can. But they're a big deal, and we need to take care of it. So that's the background behind the project. Didn't anticipate the State Preservation Office being involved, didn't anticipate them having a concern with it, but like I said, since the EPA is using federal dollars, they need to go through their channels to make sure everybody's on board, and we need to address any concerns that are brought up by any of those other agencies. What we ask here is that, I mean, we don't really know at this point what the State Preservation Office is going to require, but we do fully understand that they're going to want CLG involvement and approval, and any kind of a basically approval here in the minutes would certainly help. I don't know if we need to do that right now, honestly, because like I said, this is one step in the process. There may be more steps involved as well. Lisa just suggested they may want to do a survey of the building, which happy to help do that. Really more for information and ultimately support from the CLG to take down a safety hazard in our community and get contamination cleaned up. And I'm happy to take any questions, and Ryan's here too. He's got some more background on it too, if you have questions of him.
I have some questions. Do others have any inquiries?
I have some comments, I guess.
Okay.
I think the biggest danger to those connecting buildings right now is that the roof that is not really a roof. The
Totally
brick that
agree.
I've seen from the pictures, it's a lightly fired common brick. And it talks about in the report, it's a really good report about the dangers of exposing that to the outside. Most buildings of that time period have a face brick on the front, and they would use common brick on the sides and the back. It's a less quality brick. It's not as ideal as a fired face brick that is going to be less absorptive of water. Is that a word?
It is now.
It is now. But right now, any moisture that's getting into those walls, it's the sun's not able to hit it and the heat to draw that moisture out. I think exposing those walls would be a great first step. Obviously, some of those brick would need to be replaced, repointing, stuff like that. But yeah, I think the biggest danger to those connecting buildings is just containing all that moisture and all that stuff in there at this point. With your letter, I think one thing that you don't completely address is the open parking lot, how it directly affects the historic streetscape. You mentioned our community's passion for our downtown and the historic area. But I went down there today, and that's a pretty big building front. And just removing that and seeing a parking lot there, not having that shape there is a detriment. I think including us in this process is very important, and having our input on how that parking lot's going to look from Main Street, and possible ideas of what we could do to keep with the size and spacing of the different buildings, and not just creating that hole. I think a parking lot under the circumstances is probably the best option. But I think just looking at the plan view where it just shows an entrance and two trees, I think we could be a lot more creative to blend that in. I don't know if it'd be worth trying to save any of that front elevation. I know some of the historic pictures show some beautiful brickwork.
And some of that is the historic structure facade is still there. I mean, you walk in upstairs, you can see the old windows, you can It's dangerous. You can stick your head out and see the stone that was used at the facade. A couple of challenges is the building on the west side is not as tall. So if you're going to remove the wall, is there going to be enough there to support it? The other challenge is the EPA funding will pay for demolition. It won't pay for necessary restoration or preservation of the facade. So that I think is another factor that would probably need to be looked at. Even we had the Main Street, I forgot his name, and I shouldn't forget his name, architect for the Main Street program, had a demonstration, a PowerPoint here last year, I believe, and he showed a parking lot that had like an arch facade on it. And those are ideas that probably need to be considered, but in this stage of the game, we don't have the funding to do it. And the challenge with the EPA is get the building down, assess what's underneath it. We'll take the building down, but the facade might be step 2. How do we deal with that later? But the original facade is still there. It's just in there preserved.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a couple of comments too. I'd like to piggyback onto the comments that we just heard. Certainly the brand new exposed party walls on both sides are a concern, but I think it goes deeper than that. We're sitting on limestone foundations. And really, I'm less concerned about protecting the walls as I am protecting the foundations of the two buildings on either side. Drainage is going to be a huge consideration if we're going to leave a hole. So as we start to go through the design portion of the parking lot, it's not just going to be an overlay of asphalt. And it certainly isn't going to be an overlay of crushed rock, because we're going to have drainage issues. And we're not even talking about remediation yet, but that's just going to be step 1. So
And
that
those
sort of-
items are mentioned in the
Yep.
RFP for the day.
So my second comment, and you and I have had this conversation, and I think Patrick and I have had this conversation. My concern, not even just from a historic preservation standpoint, but from a Main Street standpoint, is that I would hope that we would see the parking lot solution as a temporary solution, that it's going to be the best and highest use for an empty lot, knowing that we've got to remove the building, but that lot should be almost immediately available for development. What I'd really like to see is no hole in Main Street, but a redevelopment of perfectly good real estate once it's all cleaned up that will go back to benefiting Main Street. So whether we take a historic look at it and we say we want to try to maintain something of that quality, or we just use those as architectural guidelines, but for a new building to be developed in that space. So again, I would agree that the immediate solution of parking is the best solution, but that's a solution I think that is temporary, or in my mind it should be temporary, and that space should be developable in the future.
I think everybody would agree. What will hold that up, if anything, would be CDPHE's requirement, depending on how we need to remediate, how much contamination is under the ground, or under the building, and then how do we take care of it. In other words, when we're demolishing the building and we do the assessments and we find it, do we just dig it out and remove it? Would that, our conversations about that centered also around the foundations of the buildings. You don't want to jeopardize the foundations of the building if you're going to start removing the contamination. So we're going to have to be pretty careful about how we address a lot of that. So, yeah, good points. It's like you were in our meetings when you brought those up.
So my question, and I don't know that it's a question, but I think that at least my general consensus is that we all agree that something has to be done, leaving it there or hoping that a developer will come in and spend the money on redeveloping it in its current situation is just not an option that would be not only viable, but I don't think anybody with any sense at all would, or just a lot of money, would just,
Well-
would do something like that, so.
Yeah, and quite honestly, CDPHE, if we were to sell the property to somebody else, CDPHE could and would hold them responsible for the cleanup.
And certainly that would be a no-starter for
No-starter,
somebody
yeah.
wanting to
Yeah.
to do something with it. So what my impression is, what you need is something from our group indicating that we are open to moving forward with the demolition of the building, and that we are not going to delay the State Historical Society from making that determination. Or, you know, just the date on the building does not warrant saving it. I think that one reason that we are here is to look at historical structures, but when they take away from our main street, I think we have to also look at what's realistic and move forward in that regard. I really think we have to take into consideration everything else as far as the structure is concerned and the adjacent buildings. That has to happen. But I think honestly, I individually feel like we need to move forward with the next step in removing the building, and I would not, as a member of this commission, encourage the State Historical Society to say, no, you cannot do that. So that's my position. I don't know what the rest of the board is, but I think we need to at least come to some consensus to take back to either the EPA. And honestly, Rick, I think that this board has more of a say in it than the State Historical. EPA should have come to us and not them, is my feeling, but maybe I don't know what this.
Agency to agency, yeah.
Yes. So anyway,
Yeah.
what's everyone else's feelings on this?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to suggest that maybe we go down the bench. If we're going to be asked to take action on it tonight to support it, then I think we ought to at least have on record the opinions of the individual members.
You may.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if in the RFP, if it was possible to include language about saving the facade per Mr. Madone's suggestion?
It would be unfunded. It wouldn't, we don't have a way to pay for that, so it would be adding something to an RFP that would not be paid by the EPA and would have to be separately funded somehow, and so I.
Perhaps by the State Historic Preservation Office? I mean,
Well,
that might be
those
one
are,
aspect
yeah,
we
those
could
are
make from
negotiations
them.
we'd have to have with them, yeah,
But
potentially.
that, I mean, if they have these concerns about our streetscape, and if they have these concerns about, you know, preserving the historical fabric, I wonder if that might be an even stronger selling point to them.
I think that would be a great direction to go with.
I just worry that if we have an RFP to demolish the building without writing in some protections for at least saving a portion of it, that we won't have that option down the road, when that does come time. I had two other, but if you had something to respond to that.
Yeah, just to jump in on that, the front facade, it may, to try to save that, I don't know if it would be worth it. It's one of those things you can't really determine until you start digging into it. I know the existing shared walls, there's stuff you can do with the treatment of those to where, in the engineer's report, it talks about filling in beam pockets, stuff like that. There's a way to do that to show that they were there. You're not just trying to blend them in so they disappear, you know, treating those, you know, saving those walls to show that there was a building there. And I like what Lester was talking about, where it's, I think immediately looking at the idea that a parking lot is the best fix for now, but definitely keeping it open for something else to go back in there. It's not currently a contributing building. To try to get it back to it, it's not like pulling off the mansard roof of the Fremont Bank building and having this big surprise to take that stucco off and hope there's anything left of that brick and stone would be pretty tricky. It'd be wonderful, but like you said, it's unfunded and would be very expensive. But trying to find something to excite the History Colorado and them to see that our intentions are, you know, we've got to do this now to save the buildings next to it. But, you know, as a commission here, we're going to hold you guys responsible to make sure that it, you know, isn't just a paved crappy parking lot and a big hole on Main Street.
And I think I heard you say that part of the demolition would include, I would suggest we include a slow demolition of at least the front facade so that we could record it and we could photograph it and we could document it in some way that if it's going to go away, that we have record. So I think that would be important to the fabric of Main Street. It would also be important, I think, to include in a future architectural RFP for design considerations for whatever goes back. Not that the Historic Preservation ever wants to copy or reproduce, but certainly we want to take context into account. So I think it would be in this commission's best interest to make sure that as demolition occurs, that we have monies set aside to document that, whether that's a separate staff item or that's a separate consultant item. I think that would be in our best interest to consider.
The RFP right now does not specify a slow demolition of the facade, but we can talk about adding that. Right now, it specifies a very careful demolition from the north side to the south side to protect it as much as possible. Part of the challenge might be, however, that there's machinery in there that has to come out, and how are the riggers gonna do that? You know, can they get it out the back? Can they not get it out the back? Do they have to take the front down first to do that? We think for the most part they'll take it out the back, and the smaller stuff is in the front, so it should be doable. But we
Well,
can
I think-
certainly put language in there.
Yeah, I think these are the kinds of comments though that you're hearing this evening that I think this bench thinks is important. And again, I think that, Mr. Chairman, if we're going to be asked to support this endeavor, and I'm not suggesting that we don't, but that these comments are in the record, so that at least this commission goes on record as having said these things. So that's my position.
Do we have time for a few more comments?
We do. We have a tight schedule, but I think we still have some time.
Amy, do you have some more you want to ask?
Just three really fast, because I don't want to take time away from the commission. One, I would highly encourage us to have a Historic Preservation Commission committee member in those meetings with the EPA. I think it's specifically requested in the SHPO letter, and I think that it would be invaluable. Two, I would recommend that we remove, or that you remove the reference to local control in your letter. While I firmly believe in local control over state control, I think the way that it's framed, it makes it seem like locally we don't care about historic preservation, which I think obviously we do, and obviously you do. And then third, I'm a little bit concerned. I've heard you say that the parking lot will just be temporary, but I don't think that that's the current messaging that we're putting out there. So if that is indeed the intent, and I think that you've heard from this commission that they would certainly want that to be the intent, that we need to be really careful about how we're publicly messaging that. I don't necessarily want a response to any of that because I want to save the next 11 minutes for our commission members. Thank you.
I just want to make one comment regarding a temporary parking lot. As Rick has mentioned, it's going to depend on the corrective action plan and how long it takes to attain natural attenuation of the site. So while temporary is figurative and, depending on how long that temporary status is. So it could be years before we actually reach a natural attenuation of the site.
And it may not be a parking lot until then either.
Oh, parking lot would cap.
Yeah.
We
cap.
can do parking
We can
with
do a cap.
with monitoring
Yeah.
wells.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it'll figure into our comprehensive parking plan for downtown, correct?
Right now.
That's on record. Okay, go ahead.
That's on record.
Rick, it's my understanding that the present thinking is that demolition has to occur before you can do the site investigation of what's under the building footprint because of the safety of the building. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know
And
what
because
that?
the concrete might be about 2 feet thick, which will be
Okay.
very
Do you know
expensive
how
to
many
cover.
holes they're going to put in the ground or what the sampling consists
I
of?
believe they want to put 6 additional in the building, under the building.
Okay, and those are probably evenly distributed, I would guess, just some random?
Yeah, we have a general idea that the source probably is on the west side of the building underneath the dry cleaning machine,
Okay.
but it could have been anywhere.
Reason I'm asking, it would be, I think from a preservation viewpoint, good to, if we could, separate that groundwater issue and contamination issue from the demolition issue. And I'm wondering if it could be looked at again as to whether you could get a specialized small drilling rig. They make drilling rigs that are the size that you could drive through a 3-foot wide door for indoor sampling and testing. And I'm wondering if it's possible we could install shoring in there, have shoring installed, do the sampling safely, button it back up, find out what's under that building before we proceed with demolition. I'm thinking the extra time might allow the commission to come up with some other thoughts and ideas. But I didn't want to get in the way of funding that you've got lined up, and I'm wondering if it's possible to separate those two. And technically, if it's possible to do the sampling and testing before demolition.
We've had, we as in city, EPA, CDPHE, environmental consultant, or excuse me, environmental attorney, in conversations about whether that would be possible, and those that have seen the building honestly do not even want to go there. Plus, you've got to move, most likely have to move the machinery to do it, and which adds another dilemma. How are you going to move the machinery to do it? We've toyed with it, and we talked about these smaller rigs as well. It's just, there's really concern that the vibration would cause significant problems, could cause significant problems. And I think OSHA would not really like that a whole lot, people working in an environment like that, and that's kind of the consensus of the group, that it just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't be
We're running a
viable.
little tight on
Okay,
time.
thank you.
So we're going to have to move forward. We've got another meeting that comes in right after us, but I think we need to entertain a motion, and we can get each person's individual position on that with an appropriate motion. Does anyone have a particular motion they would like to make on this particular issue?
Mr. Chairman, I'll take a stab at one. I move that we support the city's correspondence with agencies that allow them to move forward with this property, taking into consideration comments made during this meeting by members of the commission.
I'll second.
Any other additional comments? All right, Jim, will you take roll?
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
Rich?
I'm in full support of everything that I've heard. I do want to play just a little devil's advocate in completely dismissing parking, an eventual parking solution as temporary versus permanent, as I have seen downtown parking in historic districts done very well and still within the fabric of the district. And one of the things that makes downtown businesses and districts vital is the ability to provide enough parking for people visiting them. So I do think that I don't like the idea of a void there, but I do think that there are ways that we can architecturally and through architecture and design make that a more permanent solution. It's my only addition.
And just a quick last comment. Maybe you could consider having the access to the parking lot through the alley or from Macon instead of having the access from Main Street.
The design we have in there is just one of
Yeah.
several different, it's really more of an example. Those are discussions also we're having internally.
Okay, so we move forward with the motion to approve your correspondence, and this is with the State Historical Society at this point, and that we take into consideration all of the information and thoughts that were provided by this commission today. And we have
Support, not approve. We're supporting their efforts.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we have a second. Any additional comments? And we'll take roll call.
Lauren?
I'm so sorry. Could I just add one more thing?
Yes, you may.
Just because you all only got this, or we only got this today, could I also ask, like, additional comments could be provided via email in case in case you want to?
Certainly.
Comments provided this evening and additional comments that may be provided afterwards as a friendly amendment. I just want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to have a voice, and given that there's another meeting that starts in 4 minutes, I know that that wasn't actually possible.
I'm fine with that.
So amended.
Seconded.
All righty. Lauren?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Lester?
Yes.
Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Jim? Yes. Billy?
Yes.
It passes. We are out of time, so we won't have time for general announcements at this meeting, and I would open it up to the public, but sorry, guys, we're out of time. So with that, our next meeting is when?
January 24th at 4 p.m.
January 24th at 4 p.m. I will adjourn. Thank you for joining us.